Morning, everybody. I wanted to film a video just quick illustrating the difference between maple syrup and honey in terms of health benefits. So I recently did a video on sweeteners, diving into sort of what the difference was between certain sweeteners. Now, it's pretty obvious by now that we want to try and avoid sugar. And the reason, quite simply, is because when you look at plain white sugar that you just find everywhere, it's sucrose. It's just highly, highly refined, highly processed. What exactly does that mean? Well, sugar usually comes from either cane sugar, or the sugar cane, or beets, which are usually genetically modified. Although by the time you reach the final product, sucrose, that white powdery sugar that you find, it really doesn't matter whether it's genetically modified or not. The genetic modification is a completely separate issue with respect to the environment, and that's on a plant-by-plant basis, so we'd have to dive into that. It's not just you can't just say a blanket statement that all GMOs are bad and all non-GMOs are good. It's not really that simple, I think, but we can always dive into that. We could always get into that conversation. With respect to sweeteners, though, the major concern over white sugar and why it's so bad is because it's just highly refined. You have to use many different steps and different processes using many harsh chemicals and a ton of heat to actually rip out and then concentrate the sugar essentially from the plant, whatever plant you're using. And that's why it's so bad for you. It's bad for you because of the process, the chemicals, the heat. And then obviously what you're left with is something that's so far removed from a natural food, it's really a chemical by itself. The body doesn't really, it uses sucrose, but it's used to taking it from food, right? It's used to converting it either from fats, from starches. It's used to getting it in the environment. It's not used to getting it through an isolated chemical compound. So you're just jamming tons of isolated refined sugar in the body, and it's a huge shock to the system. It's a huge shock to the pancreas. And in order to get it from the blood into your cells, the pancreas has to pump out tons of insulin. Insulin is what allows sugar from the blood to then go into your cells, which is where you end up using it. You use sugar in your cells to produce, to use it for energy, to survive, to do things in the body, brain function, muscle function, etc. So that's part of the reason. That's a separate issue. There are a lot of food sources, though, of sugar. It's not the same as sucrose. Like fruits have fructose, for example, right? Maple syrup and honey are very sweet naturally, so a lot of people use it to sweeten instead of using sugar, and I love them. I love them both. Maple syrup is a food. Same with honey. They're much more complex. It's not refined. They don't use harsh chemicals, especially if you can find organic and they're from local trusted sources. If you find the regular honey, by the way, just those regular mass-produced honey, yeah, I don't know what kind of chemicals they use. I don't know exactly, but they are using heat. They're pasteurizing it, and by the end of it, there's actually probably more sugar from the honey than all of the other compounds because they sort of die out from the heat anyway. And maple syrup, I'm not really sure, but again, it's best if you can find it from local farms and organic if you can. This is not organic maple syrup, I don't think. Actually, it was only $1 more for the organic stuff. So really for $1, I could have just got it. But there are some cases where you could argue, what's the difference between organic and non-organic? Is it really worth it? In maple syrup, I don't know. I really don't know. For green leafy vegetables, yeah, I would choose organic versus not. It's totally worth it, but it might not be worth it in every case, and that's totally up to you. The worst thing about maple syrup, though, in compared to choosing honey, is the heat. Maple syrup, although it's a whole food and is rich in other nutrients, it's way more complex than taking highly refined table sugar that you find everywhere. I'd much rather choose maple syrup in small quantities. But the worst thing about maple syrup, the reason why I would choose honey versus maple syrup every day of the week, is because when maple syrup comes out of the tree, it's heated. It's clear. It's a clear sap. In order to get that dark color, maple syrup is boiled. It's heated over time, and it sort of boils down to create this thick syrup. Heated sugar is one of the worst things for human health. If you take sugar and mix it with water over a pan, over the stove, and you create a simple syrup, like if you're creating simple syrup for mixed drinks, for example, you'll know that as the pan is over the stove and over the fire, once you pour the sugar in and you're heating it, the liquid will turn brown, right? Water's clear, you add sugar to it, you add heat on the bottom, it actually turns brown, doesn't it? In the same way that if you take fat, if you take butter and you put it in a pan and you start heating it, it'll start to brown up, right? Eventually it gets burnt, but before it gets burnt and it gets scorched, even just from the low heat, it actually browns up. Well, same with sugar. That's an oxidation process. That brown sugar is one of the worst things for human health, aside from maybe rancid oils, in terms of from food, by the way. I mean, there's chemicals that are much worse. But you generate a lot of harsh chemicals when you heat sugar, and it's incredibly aging, incredibly pro-inflammatory in the worst of ways. It's just very bad for you. It's what contributes to heart disease and chronic disease in general. That's why you have to pay so close attention to cooking method. And then besides cooking method, you have to pay attention to oxidation that can happen in the body naturally through stress and the immune system going haywire, through other pro-inflammatory processes, which we can always talk about at some other point. But for the sake of maple syrup, why it's less healthy than raw, unpasteurized honey, not the regular stuff, because that's heated as well, so they're kind of on par, is because maple syrup is heated. You want to try and avoid heated sugars at all costs. What I love about honey, especially if you could find distinctions that say raw and unpasteurized, paying close attention to local, right? You want to get it from trusted sources. There is a reason why they pasteurize food for mass market, because you can get extremely sick. But in small quantities, if you're getting it from a good local farm or a trusted source that's been doing it for a long time, it's usually safe, right? So local is always best, and fresh is always best. So with honey, by having it raw and unpasteurized, there's no heat. It's considered a raw food. So all those beneficial compounds in there, first of all, you're not heating the sugar. So if you take this honey and you put it on the stove, all of a sudden I would put it in the same category as the maple syrup. You're heating it. And that's very damaging, regardless of whether it's raw and pasteurized. As soon as you heat the stuff up, you're creating chemical compounds that are bad for human health. So don't do that. If you take raw and pasteurized honey, though, and you spread it on toast or put it in your oatmeal, I mean, it's warm. You're not really heating it. You're scorching it. You're just kind of warming it up. Sure, some compounds will be lost, but it's a lot better than sugar. And it's even better than maple syrup. Not to mention that a lot of the compounds, by not heating it, these compounds naturally found in honey are amazing for the immune system. They're very healing. Honey is one of the most healing substances found on earth in terms of a whole food. You could put it on burns. Burn victims use honey to heal. There's been amazing studies around the world on various forms of honey, in particular Manuka honey, by the way, which is very healing for the skin. But if you have a scar, a stubborn scar, you just burned yourself by accident on the stove, coconut oil is a great option. Honey is a better option, and you could even combine the two either way. Take some honey and rub it on there. Inflammation, acne, all sorts of skin conditions, you could put honey on there. It's because of these natural compounds found. So look for raw and pasteurized. I hope that helps. If this added any value, give me a thumbs up so I know what videos are actually working and which ones are not. Any recommendations for more videos, please let me know so I can continue to put content out that's valuable to you, because it's not really for me, it's for whatever you find useful. And subscribe. If you subscribe, you hit that red button, the subscription down below. It'll remind you when I create new videos so you can continue watching. We can continue building this relationship together. So have a wonderful day out there, and I look forward to sharing some more useful information with you guys soon. Take care.